Hello, and welcome to the Multimedia Design presentation for EME6507. In this presentation, we will address four main issues. These are questions to ask when designing multimedia, general design issues, the four fundamental design principles, as well as a variety of design tips. In our next design presentation, we will get into a number of more complex design issues that we need to consider when we are developing and designing our multimedia products.
There are a number of questions essentially related to instructional design and typical instructional issues when designing multimedia. First, who is the audience? Some issues related to this question would be the technical experience of the learners, the age of the learners, the cognitive ability of the learners, as well as a number of others. For example, for a group of high school advanced placement physics students, it wouldn't be appropriate to use very bright colors and a number of very simplistic images. However, this would be very appropriate for primary school children. Also, the audience for which a multimedia tool is being designed should influence the level of user control provided, as well as the complexity of both the material and the design. Second, ask what is the message I am trying to convey to the audience. This is a typical question one would ask when designing any instruction, and multimedia tools are no different. The answer to this question would influence many aspects of the multimedia tool, such as the types of media utilized, the amount of media used, and a number of others. As with any instructional tool, it is very important that your multimedia projects convey the message to the learner that you are trying to convey and are simply not add-ons to the content. Third, what are my objectives for the presentation? The use of multimedia should simply be an aid and help you accomplish those objectives. Fourth, what type of actions do I want the audience to do? Essentially, this relates to the amount of interactivity and the level of complexity of the presentation. Do you want students to simply view a multimedia presentation? Are you going to have a class discussion utilizing the multimedia presentation? Will students use the multimedia presentation as a standalone learning tool where they navigate through it on an individual basis? All of these are questions that will influence the design of your tool. For example, if you are presenting to the class and want to stop at various points for discussion, then these pauses need to be built into the presentation. However, stopping points might not be necessary if you're simply having students view a multimedia presentation on a more independent basis. Fifth, ask what materials are available to you. This is a very important question and will greatly influence the design of your multimedia tool. If you do not have access to a video editor or a web editor, for example, then it's going to be very difficult to develop web pages with embedded video. However, as we've discussed in this course and will continue to discuss as we move throughout, there are a number of free tools that make this less of an issue than it was, say, 10 years ago. There are other issues related to this question, though, that also need to be considered. Essentially, what materials are available to your learners outside of the classroom? If all of your learners have access to the internet, but not PowerPoint, for example, then it's going to be great to make your multimedia tool in a web format as opposed to PowerPoint presentation format. However, this might be an issue because of lack of server space. So, as you can see, there are many questions related to the availability of multimedia authoring software and hardware and tools in general to both the designer and the learner that need to be considered. Finally, what are the limiting factors in the situation? These can include time, space, the number of computers in the learning environment, and your experience level. For example, you may want to create a simulation on some topic. However, you have never developed the authoring skills in the various simulations software that exists, authoring skills. Therefore, you would have to spend a significant amount of time developing those skills. Also, with additional requirements on teachers' time, as well as curricular requirements, some topics may not really lend themselves to multimedia very well. For example, it may not be practical to develop a multimedia tool for a very small, less important topic in your curriculum because of the time it takes to develop and perhaps utilize in the learning environment. However, it may be very beneficial to create multimedia tools, or better yet, have students create multimedia tools for topics that are more pronounced in the curriculum.
What are some poorly designed things in everyday life? You will get an opportunity to explore this question further in another assignment in the course, but I want to talk about a number of issues here. When I pose this question to students, I get many answers, but I have two quick examples. First, on campus at UNC Charlotte, where I used to work, there's a doorway that connects two hallways. And the doorway has two doors made of glass with a horizontal metal bar across the middle, seemingly to push to get through the door. However, you must actually pull the door to get through it. And I've never seen anybody actually pull the door on the first try. Because of the horizontal bar across the middle, everybody pushes the door first and then pulls after realizing that the door must be pulled. I've even seen people take a second to figure out that you must pull the door even after pushing it didn't work, because the visual cues there were clearly to push the door to open it. This is also an issue when designing multimedia. It should be very clear how to get around the tool, and the things should do what they appear to do. And that's very critical to consider when you are designing multimedia products. Another example is a parking garage that I used to frequent when I was in grad school. There was an intersection between the first level and the single ramp to the higher levels in which it was not clear as to who had the right of way. Also, even if it was clear, it was extremely difficult to see cars coming down the ramp when turning the corner of the bottom level to go up to see if there were parking spaces further up. In all of my life, I had never seen a wreck in a parking garage until I frequented this one, in which I had seen 3 wrecks in less than 2 years. And this is also an important issue to consider when designing multimedia. When someone gets to a certain point, they need to know what the next move is, whether it is by them or by the tool itself. Now, these are just a couple of quick examples. In the Design Part 2 multimedia presentation, we're going to explore a number of other issues related to multimedia and how we can think about everyday things and how everyday things are poorly designed and apply that to multimedia design. There are a number of things also that I do not like in multimedia presentations, as they are just simply poor design elements. Some of these things include flashy text or images, long download times because of poor file management, dead links, tons of different font sizes being used and font colors being used with no clear purpose or consistency, unrelated media simply added to the tool to add maybe an additional visual element, but it doesn't enhance the content, and then poor navigation. And there are a variety of others, and we're going to address a number of these in the next slides.
3 design issues we will address are navigation, functionality, and Judy Harris's 2 questions. First, navigation should be very clear in a multimedia tool such as a web page. There are many ways in which this could be accomplished. One way is simply by using a navigation menu on each page of a website. It is very important also that the user know where they are going when they click on a link within a website. Some issues related to navigation include the appearance of links and downloading documents. When people learn new skills, it is human nature to use them in excess. For example, when I look back at my first PowerPoint presentation and all of the flashy and unnecessary features, it's somewhat embarrassing. This is also the case with other forms of media. In web pages, for example, it's very easy to change the appearance and the color of links. However, when this is done, sometimes it's not clear that the link text is still a link. Many people are used to seeing blue underlined text as a link, so whenever a change is made, there needs to be some indication that the linked text is in actuality a hyperlink. Also, when I click on a link, I hate for my computer to start downloading either a Word document or a PDF or some other file without me knowing it. So it's important to let the user know that they are about to download a non-web file rather than simply linking to another web page. Functionality is also extremely important. All aspects of your multimedia tool should help your tool accomplish its objectives. All extraneous media elements that are unrelated to accomplishing these goals and objectives should be omitted. I always like to refer to the acronym KISS, or Keep It Simple Silly. When I think of this, I'm always reminded to stick to my goals for the multimedia tool being developed. Finally are Judy Harris's 2 questions, which essentially answer, is it worth it? To answer this, you should always ask yourself 2 general questions. First, does this allow me to do something I could not do before without the multimedia tool? If it does, then use it. If not, then ask yourself question number 2, does this allow me to do something I could do before but better? And in this case, it might be appropriate to use the multimedia tool. Of course, defining what better is very individual in nature, and there are a lot of issues to consider when determining what makes something better, what makes a learning environment or a learning experience better. So that is going to be up to you as the designer of the instruction to determine.
There are 4 fundamental design principles which we're going to talk about here in this presentation, and they spell out crap. And if these 4 are not followed appropriately, then your product might end up being crap. These 4 are contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. We'll get into these more over the next few slides. Contrast refers to the difference between the colors used in a presentation and is important for a number of reasons other than simple readability. First, contrast guides your eyes around a page. Second, related to this, contrast can be used to create a hierarchy of information. In the image on the left, you can see that the information is difficult to read and blends in with the background. As a result, there is no clear hierarchy of information. On the right, however, the contrast between the text, links, and background are much better. As a result, your eyes are guided from one element to another, and there is a clear hierarchy of information. Repetition refers to using repeated elements throughout a project and ties various elements such as buttons, navigation, color, and style together. In the example below, the color scheme and navigation structure is used from one page to the next, at least to some degree, clearly illustrating the connectedness between the 2 pages. Alignment refers to the layout of elements on a page. Essentially, there are 2 rules for alignment. First, choose one alignment and stick with it. For example, don't use a left justified alignment on one page and then a block alignment either later in the page or on another page within the same multimedia product. A second rule is that a centered alignment, when not referring to blocks of text, is safe, balanced, and formal. So, if you have a web page, for example, you don't want to necessarily have all of the content on the left side of the page and then the right side having a great deal of white space. If you centered that content on the page, you have an equal amount of white space on the left and the right. Now, when referring to blocks of text, you do not want to center blocks of text as it is more difficult to read typically than a left-aligned text or a block-aligned text. Proximity refers to the distance various items are from each other and is responsible for the perceived relationships between elements on a page. For example, closer elements indicate stronger relations than elements that are further apart. The items that are further apart typically become visually disconnected. In the top images, we can see that there is no clear alignment. Everything is placed in various areas of the page, creating a disjointed mood. Also, the proximity of elements is unclear. Some elements are close together while other elements are further apart, and it's difficult to tell what is related to what. In the bottom image, there is both a clear alignment that is consistent throughout the page, as well as a clear proximity structure. Looking at this page, a hierarchy is evident and there's a clear relationship between the different elements on the page. The strength of that relationship is evident by the proximity of the different elements. In these next two slides, I will present some general design tips. First, whenever elements are important or it is necessary to draw special attention to them, then do so. For text elements, this can be done using bold, underline, italics, color, or by placing them in a box. Graphics can be modified using a border or including other elements to emphasize their importance. Also, it is important to keep related elements together and unrelated elements separate in many situations. And this can be done by separating items using horizontal or vertical lines, or again, putting items in boxes and perhaps giving them different background colors to draw them out. Another common problem in design is the tendency to overcrowd areas. This should be avoided and plenty of white space should be used. However, there is a happy medium and elements should not be placed too far apart, providing too much white space. It's annoying to have to scroll down a page when it's not necessary and there's really a very limited amount of information on that page.
Managing colors is also important. You will definitely want to limit the number of colors you use in a multimedia tool, as well as be consistent with their use. For example, do not use multiple colored backgrounds within a multimedia tool in most situations. Managing the colors of fonts and other media elements present in the tool is also important. As mentioned previously, file size is an important issue to consider. So it's important to compress files as much as possible while also keeping quality in mind. What this does is minimizes download time for the learner. So there's always this quality versus quantity issue that must be taken into account. However, in most situations, you're going to want to compress all media elements. Finally, it's important to be consistent with fonts throughout a tool. You should not use more than 2 font types, and the colors should be consistent throughout. For example, all links should look the same. All body text should look the same. All headings at various levels should look the same. So headings at the first level should have one appearance. Headings at a second level should have a separate appearance. Headings at a third level should have another appearance. And they should all illustrate a clear hierarchy in the instructional tool. Other elements in your multimedia tool should also have the same font color and the same font style throughout.
This concludes part 1 of the design presentation for EME6507.